There's just certain screenshots that clickbait doesn't even cover it. The title of this: Was I rejected from jury duty for being too smart? As soon as I saw this title, I had a pretty good idea what was about to be said. When it comes to burden of proof, she absolutely gets it, but that's more or less supposed to be common sense. And here's what I mean about who has the burden of proving their case.
Thinking. The attorneys also got to ask us some questions, I think, to still root out anyone who could be dismissed with cause. For instance, the defense counsel asked if we all agreed that a person was innocent until proven guilty. And a few people said no, and they were genuinely shocked to learn that this is a foundational tenet of our justice system. One woman insisted for at least 10 minutes that the person on trial must be guilty because why would they even be here if they weren't?
Of course, she is. I will show you her video, the other titles of her videos to make my point later. She's coming from the left. She doesn't think our system's fair. So, of course, she understands that aspect of it and how, yes, people can be abused and people can give can give more credence to law enforcement and not understand that the burden is on law enforcement to prove their case, and benefit of the doubt is supposed to go to the defendant, even if you have a respectable opinion of law enforcement. But then she proves she's not as smart as she thinks she is, and just watching this video, frankly, I don't think people can be as smart as she thinks she is. Let's watch.
Great question, lady. Great question. The prosecutor then asked if we would agree to vote guilty, even if we didn't feel that the law in question was fair or legitimate. If the evidence points to guilt, if this person you feel is guilty of this law, will you vote guilty regardless of how you feel about the law? And this time, everyone nodded their head yes, except for me. And now it was my turn to be shocked. First, to realize I was the only one saying no. And second, that I had apparently gotten this question wrong, according to the prosecutor.
No, according to our legal system, the legislature makes the laws. If those laws are unconstitutional, meaning they're in conflict with a superior law, and by the way, federal and state law isn't quite superior and inferior. They supposedly have uh, different obligations or different authorities. And so things like the border would actually be more federal than state, even if you feel that the federal government isn't doing their job. But that's a separate issue. On this one, she's shocked she got the question wrong of the trier of fact, which is what juries are more or less expected to be in most of the country, because the judge determines legal issues, if evidence is supposed to be thrown out, that kind of thing. That's the judge's job because he's a qualified legal, he's qualified to make those decisions. It's a prosecutor's job to prosecute and the defender's job to in defense. So, yeah, she got that question wrong. Now let's keep watching where she again shows it's not that she was too smart.
He singled me out and patiently explained to me that it's the jury's job only to find the facts and determine whether or not a person is guilty or not guilty of a certain crime, not to determine whether or not the crime should be a crime. And then he asked me again, would I convict someone of a crime I didn't believe was a crime? And they handed me a microphone. And I said, No. I said I might be wrong. Please correct me if so, but it is my understanding that it is my right as a member of a jury to return whatever vote I feel is fair, regardless of what the evidence shows.
No, it is absolutely not. It is not what is fair, regardless of what the evidence shows. It is, does the evidence meet the burden to convict the person of the crime they are accused? Period. It is not her right to say, I don't think this is a crime. I know going into this trial, so I should be on the jury to vote guilty regardless of what happens in the trial. That is not her right. That's why she was kicked off. That's called bias. If you have an unfavorable view of police and won't convict regardless of what the evidence says, then you don't get to be on the jury. If you believe, like what was said of the juror earlier, that they must be guilty, they're on trial, you don't get to be on the jury. Now, certain assumptions should almost always go to the defendant because the burden of proof is on the prosecution. There is an exception, what's called an affirmative defense. That is, if you make a claim in court, even as a defense attorney, you have to have enough evidence that it you can't just assert it. You have to provide that it is at least a possibility. For example, self-defense. If you say if you claim self-defense, you have to show that there is at least some evidence or interpretation of the evidence presented that self-defense is a reasonable interpretation, and ergo, it's reasonable doubt. Not that it is absolutely 100% self defense. So the burden is still on the prosecution once a minimal effort by the defense to show it is possible that it was self defense. Sorry if that was a bit confusing. So let's look at some of the names of videos to make my point that when she defines herself as a critical thinking YouTuber, it isn't. It's left wing political commentating, pure and simple. Pizza Hut is lying. They're not firing the drivers because of a minimum wage hike. Uh, unless she has data showing they were planning on firing them about the same time anyway, they might not have went out of business because of it. But considering we can get almost everything through DoorDash now, why not Pizza Hut? So it's an unnecessary expense on their part to begin with. And as much as things like loyalty is great, businesses is often a two-way street. You are there to help them make money or accomplish their goals, and they pay you to do that. So if you become more of a burden, they may decide you're no longer necessary, but that's because it's a relationship based off of it's a transactional relationship by definition. And of course, she's very much into Roe v. Wade, which is fine. I meant not fine. I disagree with her, but uh, that's not the only thing that I was talking about. Gender wage gap. And when she brought this up, her entire thesis was because women may have less flexible schedules, they'll get paid less, but they'll work the same amount of hours. Well, yeah, but they're putting more of a burden on the employer to make sure to uh, the person with the more flexible schedule is there when the business needs them. And if somebody calls out, they know they can call them. So they're more of a benefit to the company. So her assertion that this is sexist is just not accurate. It's another thing added to why things like maternity leave, when you add it all together, makes it not a 100% one to one comparison. Capitalism would have killed penicillin. Like to see it. But like I said, I'm not one of these haters. That government does something good, great. Capitalism, I think, does a lot of things better. The post office became a lot better because they had to compete with FedEx and UPS. Let's see. Don't punish fascism. Alternative BS. Supplements made by Mormon. Are scared of dog autism. Whatever. That she probably found somebody. She probably found some obscure person that said it, but often finding obscure people to laugh at it doesn't make you the worst thing in the world as long as you're careful on the context you put it in. But there's one video that absolutely is silly in its premise. Left wing authoritarianism isn't even real. Pardon me, yes, English is my first language. That's one of those words that, depending on the day, depends on whether I can say it correctly or not. But anyway, yes. Just look at the big cities. You ask a conservative, especially a libertarian conservative or libertarian leaning conservative, it's the left that are tyrannical. You ask obviously, if you ask a lefty like this woman, it's the right that is all tyranny. And the reality is, left and right are social constructs that often have contradictory opinions, and what may even be considered left wing today may not be tomorrow or may not be in other countries. Today, right now, Biden administration uh, and people that are associated with them have argued that they may not be able to completely censor freedom of speech, but they can require the algorithm to censor, to basically make it hard to find quote unquote mis and disinformation. And the reason I put that in quotes is the Biden laptop story. That is his laptop. That was Hunter's laptop. That was true. Officials from the government tried to say it wasn't because it, and the best argument for why it might not be true was it sounded like something the Russians would do. Smug is something we probably all get from time to time. But if you think you're the smartest person in the room, most of the time, if you're by yourself, you're probably wrong. And the reason I say that is I'm not necessarily saying this woman is unintelligent because I disagreed with her specifically on this issue and because I showed you some of her political commentary that I'm like, I don't think you're critically thinking. First of all, the left and right is legitimately a social construct. Left wingers tend to be all for freedom of speech, even for freedom of speech for the crazies, when they fear their own speech is threatened. But when they have the power and they get to decide how speech is controlled, you get people that are sympathetic to the current administration, the Biden administration, claiming that we should be able to regulate the a algorithm for websites like this to quote unquote control mis and disinformation. You mean like the Hunter laptop? You mean claims that something didn't happen when they show the video of it happening? So I don't think this woman is. She has her blind spots, and I just found the smugness of saying she was kicked off a jury for being too smart to be something I wanted to comment on. Now, like I said, if people that watch her stuff think that I that this is a hit piece, it's not. She had her opinion on what she should do as a jury. The legal system and myself disagreed with her. As for her videos, I was showing that when she calls her website about critical thinking, all she does is reaffirm her own biases against the right. I don't see her actually taking the argument, attempting to steelman it, finding people she might actually agree with on the right on certain issues. All she does is the same old, the other side's bad. I don't consider that critical thinking. As for her hard science stuff, maybe I'll check it out at some point.